Now, as to Adolf Hitler's grandmother being impregnated by a Rothschild in the house of the mansion of Rothschild, this is backed up by Walter Langer in his book The Mind of Hitler, in which he states Adolf's father, Alois Hitler, was the illegitimate son of Maria Anna Maria Anna Schlickengruber, was living in Vienna at the time she conceived. At that time, she was employed as a servant in the home of Baron Rothschild. As soon as the family discovered her pregnancy, she was sent back home, where Alois was born. On the surface, it would appear Hitler was unlikely to be a Rothschild, but then again, when you discover the benefits that the Rothschilds got out of this war, both financially and politically, a Rothschild connection does not appear as outlandish as it may initially seem. In 1941, President Roosevelt takes America into the Second World War by refusing to sell Japan any more steel scrap or oil. Japan was in the midst of a war against China, and without that scrap steel and oil, Japan would be unable to continue that war. Japan was totally dependent upon the United States for both steel scrap and oil. Roosevelt knew this action would provoke the Japanese to attack America, which they subsequently did at Pearl Harbor. In 1942, Prescott Bush, the father of future American presidents George Herbert Walker and George W., has his company seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act. He was funding Hitler from America, whilst American soldiers were being killed by German soldiers. Jews are also being slaughtered by these same soldiers. Interestingly, the ADL never criticizes any of the Bushes for this. In 1943, February 18th, Zionist Isaac Greenbaum, head of the Jewish Agency Rescue Committee, in a speech to the Zionist Executive Council states, "If I am asked, could you give from the UJA, United Jewish Appeal, monies to rescue Jews, I say no, and I say again no." He would go on to state, "One cow in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Poland." This is not a surprise. The whole idea of Zionist support for the slaughter of innocent Jews was to scare the survivors into believing that their only place of safety was Israel. How else do you think the Zionists could ensure Jews leave the beautiful European cities in which they live in order to settle in a desert? In 1944, on the 6th of November, Lord Moyne, British minister resident in the Middle East, was assassinated in Cairo by two members of the Jewish terrorist group, the Stern Gang, led by future Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir. He is also responsible for an assassination attempt against Harold MacMichael, the High Commissioner of the British Mandate of Palestine, this same year. Interestingly, he also masterminds another successful assassination this year against the United Nations representative in the Middle East, Count Folke Bernardal, who, although he had secured the release of 21,000 prisoners from German camps during World War II, was seen by Yitzhak Shamir and his terrorist collaborators as an anti-Zionist. In Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, two further Rothschild World Banks are created: the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. In 1945, at the end of the Second World War, it is reported that IG Farben plants were specifically not targeted in the bombing raids on Germany. Interestingly, at the end of the war, they were found to have sustained only 15% damage. The tribunals held at the end of the Second World War to investigate Nazi war crimes censored any materials regarding or recording Western assistance to Hitler. The Rothschilds take a giant step towards their goal of world domination when the Second League of Nations, called the United Nations, was approved this year. In 1946, on July 22nd, the future Prime Minister of Israel, Ashkenazi Jew David Ben-Gurion, orders another future Prime Minister of Israel, Ashkenazi Jew Menachem Begin, to carry out a terrorist attack on the King David Hotel in Palestine to try and drive out the British. As a result of this, 91 people were killed, most of them civilians, 28 British, 41 Arabs, 17 Jews, and 5 others. Around 45 people are injured. Menachem Begin went on to proudly proclaim himself as the father of modern terrorism. Just to put the gravity of the attack on the King David Hotel into perspective, it was at the time the biggest death toll as a result of single terrorist action ever, and was only surpassed over 40 years later by the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie. In 1947, the British, who prior to World War II declared that there would be no more immigration of Jews to Palestine, in order to protect the Palestinians from their acts of terror against both them and the British soldiers, transfer control of Palestine to the United Nations. The United Nations resolved to have Palestine partitioned into 2 states, one Zionist and one Arab, with Jerusalem to remain as an international zone to be enjoyed by all religious faiths. This transfer was scheduled to take place on May 15, 1948. The United Nations had no right to give Arab property to anyone, as indeed, even though the Jews owned 6% of Palestine at that time, Resolution 181 granted the Jews 57% of the land, leaving the Arabs, who at that time had 94%, with only 43%. Information collected by the ADL in its spy operations on U.S. citizens is used by the House Select Committee on Un-American Activities. Subcommittee Chair Claire Hoffman dismisses the ADL's reports on suspected communists as hearsay. In the spring of 1948, the Rothschilds bribed President Harry S. Truman, 33rd President of the United States from 1945 to 1953, to recognize Israel, Rothschild-owned Zionist, not Jewish territory, as a sovereign state with $2 million, which they gave to him on his campaign trail. They then declare Israel to be a sovereign Jewish state in Palestine, and within half an hour, the 33rd President and also 33rd degree Freemason President Truman declared the United States to be the first foreign nation to recognize it. This angers many Jews who realize that this hexagram was used in the ancient mystery religions as the symbol of Molech, described as a demon of unwilling sacrifice, and is also, interestingly, the name of the stone owl the elite worship at Bohemian Grove, and Astaroth, described as the Lord Treasurer of Hell. The hexagram was also used to represent Saturn, which has been identified as the esoteric name for Satan. This indicates that anyone killed in the name of Israel is actually a sacrifice to Satan. These dissenting Jews believed the menorah, the oldest Jewish symbol, should be used, and pointed out that the hexagram is not even a Jewish symbol. But of course, as the Rothschild Zionists use it, that is what ends up on the Rothschilds. I mean Zionist. Oh, I mean Israeli flag. In the early hours of April 19th, 132 Jewish terrorists from the Irgun gang, led by future Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and the Stern gang, led by future Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, brutally massacre 200 men, women, and children as they are sleeping peacefully in the Arab village of Deir Yassin. Following the United Nations transfer of Palestine to an independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state on May 15th, the Israelis launched a military assault on the Arabs with blaring loudspeakers on their trucks, informing the Arabs that if they did not flee immediately, they would be slaughtered.